In this video series, we'll look at different land titles and how titles affect properties in general. Let's begin with the CFO. This is the most popular title anywhere in the real estate space, and it's probably the only title a lot of people have heard of or are comfortable with. A CFO is a document that satisfies that an entity has been given the right to occupy a property. It's referred to as a certificate of occupancy, not ownership, which means it is valid for a period of just 99 years, after which the government reserves the right to renew it. A CFO can only be issued on a land if no previous title has been issued. If a CFO has been issued on a piece of land before, in the case of a change of ownership, another CFO cannot be issued, and that brings us to the next title. A governor's consent. First things first, you need to understand that all lands are held in trust by the governor of a state. This means he is the custodian of all the land in that state, and which means he is the one that gives the CFO. The Land Use Act states that you cannot transfer your ownership right to a piece of property except with the consent of a governor. So even if you buy a CFO land, the transaction is referred to as invalid or illegal until the governor approves it by his consent. In other words, a governor's consent is a document that shows that individual ownership and rights have been transferred from one entity to another. If you buy a property with a governor's consent, you only need to get another governor's consent to make the transaction legal. Aside from CFO and governor's consent, there are two other titles that are called gazette and excision. Now, they are not really real titles, but they are just used to classify lands that are free from government interference, that is, lands that the government has given out to the public. What is meant by an excision is that the government has given out a portion out of a large expanse of land back to those who own it indigenously. Now, since the government is the custodian of all lands, it means that the government has given the right to a particular piece of land and is now free from government interference. This is when this happens, we say such piece of property has been excised by the government, and yes, you can buy such type of property. A gazette, on the other hand, is an official record book where all the government's special dues are spelled out. So in a case where excision has been granted on a piece of property, this excision is recorded in the gazette. That is when we say such a piece of land has been gazetted. Now the question is, can you buy a gazetted or an excised land? Yes, you can. The only important thing to note is that you do your due diligence very well to make sure that the part you are buying falls within the excised portion by the state government. Now, let's talk about why it's difficult to buy lands that are awaiting excision or excision in process. Over time, we've seen people complain that they are finding it difficult to build on their lands. In fact, finding it difficult to get allocated on their lands which are awaiting excision or excision in process. They don't have the title right and the full ownership to the land. Now, let's look at a simple example. If I have a car and I have the full right to the car, and later on I decide to sell the car to you, what I would do at that point is I would transfer the right of the car to you and give you all the necessary documents. Now, I can only do that if the car is mine, if I have the full right to the car and I can prove it. Same thing goes with real estate. When you buy a piece of property, you can only get the full right of ownership to that property if you're buying from the legally confirmed owner. In a case where a piece of property is awaiting excision or an excision in process, what it simply means is that the government has not granted the full right to the party who is intending to sell it to you. In rare cases where the excision is not granted, it means just one thing: ownership has not been transferred. And if ownership has not been transferred to the person who is selling to you, ownership rights cannot come to you. So that is what happens when you buy a land that is awaiting excision or excision in process. You won't be able to get the full ownership rights until such title is perfected. In a case where an excision in process property is sold to you, you run the risk of the government coming in to demolish the property, or them saying that the property is not free and you are building on a government acquisition. So in essence, a company cannot allocate an excision in process property simply because it is not theirs fully and it is illegal to transfer the ownership rights of such a property to you. In other words, instead of buying a property with an excision in process title and having to cope with the risk of will be allocated or not having ownership, your best bet is to just buy a property with the title of an approved excision, so you can be rest assured that you have ownership rights to your property and that you can build without stress or fear from anyone.